Oceangate, Stockton Rush, Narcissist, Part 2. Richard Stockton Rush III was born on March 31st, 1962. He was an American businessman and explorer. He was best known as the co-founder and chief executive officer of the deep-sea exploration company Oceangate. On June 18, 2023, he was killed along with 4 others aboard Oceangate's submersible Titan, which imploded during an attempt to visit the wreck of the Titanic in the North Atlantic. Rush was born into a wealthy family in San Francisco, California, on March 31st, 1962. He was the youngest of 5 children born to Richard Stockton Rush Jr. of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and Ellen Rush, née Davies, of San Francisco. His maternal grandfather was Ralph K. Davies. His maternal grandmother, Louise Davies, was a philanthropist and the namesake of the Louise M. Davies Symphony Hall in San Francisco. Through his father, he was a descendant of 2 signers of the Declaration of Independence, Richard Stockton and physician Benjamin Rush. We don't have a lot of information about the dynamic that Rush had with his family, but the possibility that he was born into a family which was wealthy raises the possibility that he had a life of privilege and that could create a lack of control environment. A lack of control environment is one of the 2 constituent parts that's required for the creation of a narcissist. There are lots of different types of lack of control environment, and a privileged environment can be one too, where in essence, either the child is expected to achieve because they're surrounded by privilege and achievers, notable individuals, and therefore the bar is raised high, and no matter what they do, they never receive acceptance or praise because they're simply not good enough, grade B syndrome, or they function in an entitled fashion. Everything is given to them on a plate and they don't have to necessarily work for anything. Privilege affords them access to so much that they never have that need to earn it, and therefore don't have a sense of control over their own destiny. We don't have sufficient information to know precisely what went on in Rush's childhood, save it raises a possibility that there was a lack of control environment. Given that the family was so prominent, it's often the case, but not always the case, that narcissists gain such prominence because it caters to the prime aims. Accordingly, in terms of his childhood, we don't have any demonstrable evidence that would support that he's likely to be a narcissist other than possibilities, and that's as high as we can state it. As a child, he dreamt of becoming an astronaut and becoming the first person on Mars. This possibly might be demonstrative of magical thinking, but children often engage in such desires, wanting to be something which isn't wholly realistic, and therefore of itself, whilst an indicator, is hardly determinative. He had an interest in aviation and aquatics. He began scuba diving, aged 12, and then became a commercial pilot at 18 years old. He was clearly a capable individual, which evidences that he was of high cognitive function and was also somewhat determined. He was later told his visual acuity could disqualify him from becoming a military pilot. In 1980, he graduated from Phillips Exeter Academy. In 1984, Rush received a degree from Princeton University in aerospace engineering, thus reinforcing that he's clearly of a high cognitive function. For his thesis, he designed a high-speed, ultralight aircraft. Rush comes from a family with strong ties to Princeton. Alumni includes his father, grandfather, and his wife. His wife is descended from passengers on the Titanic. Rush's son, Richard Ben Rush, aged 11, also graduated in the MAE department and built a robotic arm for submersible vehicles for his thesis. Rush's time at Princeton also involved a series of arrests. In 1983, Rush was charged by police with drunk driving. That is demonstrative of criminal behaviour and a lack of accountability. And he allegedly drove a Volkswagen into the Dinky, the train that connects Princeton University to Princeton Junction. In 1981, when Rush was a freshman, he was arrested for possession of a controlled and deadly substance. Again, this shows a disregard for accountability with regard to the rules, criminal behaviour, and a sense of entitlement. Remember, this doesn't necessarily mean that he's a narcissist. After all, many people get involved in taking drugs, and there are others that would get involved in drink driving. But it's what it shows. It demonstrates a sense of entitlement, criminal behaviour, a lack of accountability, and in such circumstances, one has to have due regard to those as indicators, and we look at them in aggregate. In 1989, he received a Master of Business Administration from the University of California in Berkeley. After graduating from Princeton, Rush briefly worked for McDonnell Douglas as a flight test engineer for F-15 Eagle jets before getting his MBA. Again, reinforcing this is a man of high cognitive function, also clearly a hard worker, diligent. Later on, Rush worked as a venture capitalist at the San Francisco firm Peregrine Partners. He moved to the Pacific Northwest in 1989 to run the company Remote Control Technology based in Kirkland, Washington. He claimed to have built an experimental plane later that year that he flew throughout his life. Rush was a hobbyist scuba diver and spent time diving in the waters of Puget Sound. In 2006, following his first trip on a submarine in British Columbia, Rush became interested in ocean exploration at lower depths. Rush began looking into purchasing a submersible, but discovered there were fewer than 100 privately owned submarines worldwide, and was unable to purchase one. Instead, he constructed a miniature submersible using blueprints provided to him by a retired US Navy submarine commander. Again, this demonstrates his cognitive function and the determination that he exhibits not to be foiled. Could this be that he always needs to assert control by getting what he wants, or is he simply somebody that demonstrates an indefatigable application in order to achieve? The vessel Rush constructed was 12 feet long and capable of diving to a depth of 30 feet. Following the construction of his miniature submersible, he continued to try and purchase one, including attempts to buy Steve Fawcett's submersible vehicle following Fawcett's 2007 death, but was unsuccessful. Around 2007, Rush also began to explore the idea of founding his own submarine company. He believed that there could be significant market for underwater ocean tourism, and that it would provide an alternative to the significant time and technical gear required for scuba diving. Is this a masterful way of finding an alternative route, or is this someone who thinks this seems too much like hard work, let's find an easier way of doing things, and might suggest a lack of accountability? Rush founded Oceangate with business partner Guillermo Sonline in 2009. According to Rush, the goal of the company was to use commercial tourism to support the development of new deep-diving submersibles that would enable further commercial ventures, including resource mining and disaster mitigation. While conducting market research for Oceangate, Rush determined that the private market for underwater exploration had floundered due to a public reputation for danger and increased regulatory requirements on the operation of tourist submarines and submersibles. He believed these reasons were understandable but illogical, and the perception of danger far exceeded the actual risk. Was this an individual looking at the evidence and making a determination that was based on logic rather than perception, or was this the seed of his dismissive mind, deciding that, no, whilst it's understandable that you have those concerns, they're not founded in anything? And is he seeing this through his own particular lens of dismissing risk? In particular, Rush was critical of the Passenger Vehicle Safety Act of 1993, a United States law which regulated the construction of ocean tourism vessels and prohibited dives below 150 feet, which Rush described as a law which needlessly prioritized passenger safety over commercial innovation. Again, is this an individual that is looking at the evidence and determining that there was an overly restrictive approach, or is he somebody that has no regard for safety and is driven by his own ends, demonstrating an absence of emotional empathy and an absence of accountability, that he prefers to get what he wants, and the devil may take the hindmost? I will continue with an analysis of Mr. Rush in part 3, as we get more about his prior history, this time from people who knew him from his time at university.